You had to spend money to get that anyway. So the difference between the regular and the shmur matzah could be counted in your tithing calculators. They got to have an app for this. And someone said, well, that's what we're saying. We have two mitzvot. We introduced the idea of tzedakah, which is responding to a need right in front of you. And really, it's only stuck if you solve their problem. Then we had maaser, which is an obligation to give, which really was just an obligation to give to get you giving, because Judaism looks at spiritual benefits for giving. That was produce. That was from your crops. What about today? So now we have this idea of giving tithing from your income. Tithing from your income should either be directed towards poor people, like Rabbi Elie says, or it can be directed towards mitzvot, like Rabbi Zalman says. But it can't be any mitzvah that you're going to do anyway. It has to be mitzvah that you wouldn't do anyway, or the additional monies that you would spend on those mitzvah. Yes?
So then, does that justify like a lavish bar mitzvah?
So, what does it justify? You probably don't. Remember, you don't have to have anything for bar mitzvah.
Right. So does it justify a party?
No, but the difference is a fancy lulav. By shaking the lulav, you get credit for something. By having a fancy bar mitzvah, you don't really necessarily get credit for anything.
Why do you get credit for a fancier lulav?
No,
because that's a real mitzvah, having a party.
Correct. It would have to be. It have to be on the day of the bar mitzvah itself.
Okay.
So that's something to keep in mind.
Wait, I missed that. What you said?
It would have to be a seudat mitzvah. It would have to be an obligatory celebration. Obligatory celebration is only on that day. So, for example, bris, they have what Rabbi Zalman goes very well with that.
Okay.
Which is why now very often today, if someone has a summer birthday, they don't have a bar mitzvah until the fall. That doesn't count. It's still a celebration, but it's not an obligatory celebration.
What about the notion of the supplying the candles for the synagogue, or like a building fund or something like that?
Okay. So building fund, if it's required to be for membership,
Yeah.
no, because you have to pay it anyway.
Right.
It's money that you're going to be spending. But if it's a voluntary contribution, then
Is that sponsor? Or is that
well, according to Rabbi Zalman, yes. According to Rabbi Elie, no. Which is why you have to give 20% to fill everybody. Well, what about?
What about Jewish charities that help other Jews?
Okay, right, correct. So that might give you the best bang for your meister buck, right? You could extend that question. What about taxes? A portion of taxes goes to help people in need, right? So it doesn't seem to be maaser. It would seem to be more tzedakah. So before, the more you give, the better. But when it comes to, it's interesting when if we revisit the tuition discussion for a minute.
Yeah, I was just trying to say.
You have to give your kids a Jewish education. But let's say you have two schools and one's more expensive than the other. So does that may according to Rabbi Zalman count in your Meiser calculator?
Or you could do Sunday school.
Or you could do Sunday school. Correct. So then the question is, what's the bare minimum for Jewish education? I think the numbers would bear. Look, we have a Sunday school here in our community that we operate. It does not give the same quality of education. If you look at the numbers today, just in terms of where Jews are after attending just Hebrew school, it's not doing very well. Right? That's the Pew phenomenon, or the Pew poll in the research. But according to Rabbi Zalman, if you have two options and they're both good, but one is cheaper, and you choose the more expensive one, your Meiser calculations can be fulfilled. And so the Meiser is meant to do good that we would not otherwise perform. So it's like, it does relate back to that Meiser Sheni going to Jerusalem. We had to give 10%. 4 out of the 6 years that we're giving anything, which was not being given to poor people, was being utilized in the performance of a mitzvah. So the same thing with regards to this Meiser Ksafim, the tithing of our income. You have the ability to use it in bringing more godliness to the world, whether your own mitzvos or helping other people. Yes?
Is it only for you to give to Jews?
It's sort of a, my Maimonides talks about helping the poor, Jewish or non-Jewish, is within the mitzvah of tzedakah. What about the mitzvah of maaser? Well, according to Rabbi Elie, the giving tithing of our income is meant to go to tzedakah, yes. According to Rabbi Zalman, it could also work. Supporting the poor is a mitzvah. So if it's money that you wouldn't normally give and you do give, you can get credit. So I think that it's interesting to look at, okay, this is tzedakah, and this is maaser, and this is 10% of our income in different levels and in the quantities. But at the end of the day, the more you give, the better. And I think that's sort of an underlying message of the day. Give, 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 give. But how Judaism arrives at that message is very unique. Tzedakah, responding to needs. Maaser, there being an obligation to teach us to give. How we give this newfangled innovation of 10% of our income, the Maaser Ksafim, as understood by Rabbi Yisraelis to poor people, or Rabbi Shneur Zalman for mitzvos, is interesting. Who would have thought that the money you spend on tuition counts in your charitable giving? Not your taxable charitable giving, but this type of charitable giving. Yes.
Is there an upper limit?
So they talk about not giving more than 20%. Because otherwise, you don't want the giver to have to be the recipient. I haven't seen rabbis be machmir, be stringent on people to stop giving. But there is that upper limit. Yes.
What about giving of time, giving
Nice,
all
but
that
not this mitzvah. Look, there's an expression that's part of the morning blessings over the Torah, that these are things which are important in this world, and you get reward in the next world. Bikur Cholim, attending to the needs of those who are bereaved, and attending funerals, helping people get married. These are all mitzvot. There's a whole separate realm of chesed to be discovered. Here we're analyzing specifically charity. And we're seeing that charity in the concept of giving is a little bit more nuanced. But at the end of the day, it's just all part of this chesed collaborative. Yeah.
If tzedakah is supposed to engender kindness, doesn't making it really specific, making the mitzvah really specific, sort of take away from that intrinsic motivation to be kind?
So the short answer is it could. But think of Judaism in general.
But
Judaism in general has the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. And this is something that I come back to often when teaching. You have the letter of the law, which is the body, and the spirit of the law, which is the soul. And Rabbi Norman Lamb, who was the president for many years at Yeshiva University, pointed out, if you have the soul without the body, then you have a ghost. Right? It's not anchored in reality. If a body without a soul, you have a corpse. So there's this interplay between at the end of the day, do the right thing. That's the story with Hillel and Shammai, where the guy wanted to be taught all of Judaism. I'll convert to Judaism if you can teach it all to me while standing on one foot. And Shammai said, get the heck out of here. And Hillel then taught him, what is hateful to you, do not do unto others. The rest is commentary, go and learn. Hillel believes that there's a lot more to Judaism than just that. But there's recognizing that do mitzvahs, that's great. And then we have to appreciate the nuance of the rest is helpful for a fuller Judaism. If you look at the Jewish world today in terms of the Jewish community, it's in the news because of the Pew survey I mentioned a few minutes ago. The elements of the Jewish community which are opting out of Judaism are more often than not the elements that don't have ritual. They don't have the body. They're ghosts. Tikkun olam. I'm sure there's a lot of philanthropy, a lot of stuff, a lot of good values, but it's not anchored in the here and now. It's not anchored in the corpus of Jewish law. At the same time, you can encounter in even the ultra-Orthodox community a certain lack of passion, a certain lack of feeling. It just becomes hyper-ritualized. And in that community, there are some reverberations from this. Youth opting out, or there being a lack of meaning in some of the ultra-Orthodox communities, where it's just all about perpetuating, doing the same thing as was done the last generation. You have that corpse-like Judaism which can develop. At the end of the day, which type of Judaism is a more likely guarantor for the future? Actions. That's the part that ultra-Orthodox are growing leaps and bounds, while the rest of the community is not. So but there is that balance. So what about when the recession hits home? What happens if it's hard to give this Maaser Ksafim? right? Just want to make sure you get the message. So when it comes to Maaser Ksafim, there's an interesting duality. Text number 15. Everyone is obligated to give charity, even a pauper. Though he himself is supported by charitable contributions, he must give charity from what he receives. Comment from the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Karo, we referenced that before. Everyone has to give. So if a person receives charity, they have to give charity from that charity to others who also are in need. Because everyone is meant to be a giver, and no one is to be deprived the opportunity to join that class of people who are givers. It's not only about the money. Maaser Ksafim at the full 10% is if you can. But if you can't afford it, then you can't afford it. Now, only you will know. Only we know ourselves whether or not we can afford it. This is sort of there's an interesting learning exercise which I don't want to go through because I think I need all the things that are there. But what are the genuine needs and what are the necessities and what are more discretionary? But that too emerges from this exploration of Maaser Ksafim, this idea of tithing. We're supposed to give 10%. 10% is a lot. It's difficult. There are other expenses. We can begin calculating based on what we spend in addition to the baseline of mitzvot, and maybe this, and we chose a more expensive option for that mitzvah, the other mitzvah. You don't want to get it lost in all those details, like you pointed out. But it is a moment of reflection or self-evaluation. What can I give? Sometimes, every year a friend of mine who participates in Israel is a bike ride for Alin Hospital. And he goes on this 4-day bike ride, and I get this email from him, you want to support me. So give a few dollars, but it's been a couple of years, every year I decide to go up a little bit, and I start thinking, okay, what should I give? Okay, that's a lot more than I gave last year. We're talking like 36 versus 18, but sometimes I'm motivated to give the higher amount. Because, let's be honest, if I thought about the higher amount, then maybe that's where I should go forward with it. Clearly recognizing what the limitations are, but this idea of Maaser Ksafim and evaluating what we can give, we should be honest in what we can give. And recognizing that when it comes to something we said before, we talked about tzedakah and mishpat being together. And we said that the idea that charity is also part of rules and regulations. It is an obligation to give. Here too, it's the same idea. Tzedakah and mishpat are together because you can't fulfill tzedakah without some mishpat, without some justice, without some critical self-analysis of whether or not this is something to be able to determine priority. If you look on page 48, the text number 16. Person who contemplates upon and comes to emphasize with the plight of the poor will surely conduct a rigorous and meticulous self-assessment. He will not splurge on luxuries, but only spend the minimum necessary to support himself and his family. Crucial element of charity is thus contingent on mishpat, self-judgment. We ought to evaluate our spending and suffice only in what is really needed. Charity and mishpat are intertwined. This is sort of an astute observation by a Hasidic rabbi going back almost 200 years. The idea of recognizing that that requires some element of analysis. And it's not something that happens overnight. It's something which is complex. Okay, so we'll make that cheshbon. Right, cheshbon is a word that means check or the bill in Israel. Comes from the root choshev, which means to think. So we'll think about it as we are required to do. But then, how do you give? Look at the next page. Right, you have faced with two options. You can support a charitable cause by writing one large check or by writing several smaller checks over a course of time. Your choice makes no difference to the recipient, and either way the total contribution will be the same. Is there a preferable course of action? Yeah?
Small checks.
Thank you, Maimonides. But, yeah, look, it's the same amount, but so why? Why do you say that?
It's training of your character.
Correct. The idea that here too Maimonides introduces the concept of training the person to give. The more you give, the more times you give, the more you get used to giving.
Also, maybe give it all now because you may not be able to give it on a different
Okay, so that, there could be, maybe you set it all up in a charitable fund and you give from that fund disbursement. There's always a plus and minus. Good. But I think that the concept of tzedakah has really been built into the Jewish experience. If you think about the way tzedakah is encouraged, they pass the basket around every morning in services. They walk around with the tzedakah box. Or on before Jewish holidays, there's always a push. Or on Jewish fast days, there's an expression in the Talmud that if a person fasts and just deprives himself or herself of food, but doesn't focus on any sort of self-improvement or helping others, then the fast does nothing. So fast days were viewed as days that are appropriate to give charity. Rabbi Luxon always likes to make an announcement that you should give to charity that day what you would spend on lunch. So some people are thinking, wow, I haven't been at my desk. There's, have business lunches where they can spend, $80, $90. Or the idea that many have a custom of having a tzedakah box that money is dropped in before lighting candles every Friday afternoon. These are all practices which develop to highlight the opportunities of how giving regularly and often, right? Vote early, vote often, give tzedakah early, give tzedakah often. And that's also why it's such an important part of Jewish education, of chinuch. Right? You always get the note, send a little bag with coins in so your kid has something to give every day. And they start wondering, Mom, where are my coins? I'm the only kid who doesn't have them. So it's the idea of introducing this concept of giving charity. A rabbinical colleague tells the story of having left his wallet in the kitchen. He comes back and he sees his child playing with the wallet, and he says, "Can I have that back?" And the child gives the wallet back, and he's a little upset. The cash is gone. And what happened to the money? And the kid's like, "What money?" He's like, "The papers." "Oh, I threw the papers out." "But don't you know that's money?" And the kid's like, "No, that's not money. Money's what we put in the pushka." So it's important to teach the value of money also. But so it highlights sort of the more we give, the more qualities of kindness and giving become ingrained in us. So as is often the case, we end where we began. Give generously. I like the fact that everyone wants to give to KJ. That's much appreciated. But at the same time, an exploration of how this ethos developed within Judaism, from tzedakah to maser ksafim, to recognizing the need to give to others, to give towards the performance of our mitzvot, is helpful to have a more nuanced appreciation for the ethics of charity. Next week we'll move on to the character trait of humility. Sometimes we view it as a major value. Moshe was humble. I'll leave you with the line that was once expressed: a person should be an unav, which means humble, not a zanav, which means the tail of the animal. And we'll talk about balancing those types of things when we get back together next week.
So there's a class tomorrow or something?
There is the Ramaz is hosting a parent evening of learning in conjunction with Kohelet. It's one of the 2 learning programs during the year. You're welcome to attend. I think the Kohelet requirement for fellows to attend one of the 2 events.
And where is it? When is it?
It's in this building tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. Ashkenaz versus Smart. Let's go. We're going to duke it out.
You like it?
That's right. Yeah.